The glass didn't just shatter, it exploded. Red wine splashed across her gown like fire across snow. The crowd gasped in perfect unison. And for a moment, even the orchestra forgot to breathe. Then came the voice. Sharp, commanding, soaked in privilege. "Security," said Vivian Langford. "Get her out. She's not supposed to be here." Hundreds of eyes turned hungry for drama. Phones raised instantly. Flashes burst like lightning across the marble floor. At the center of it all stood Naomi Cole, the only black woman in a ballroom of white silk, old money, and loud laughter. Her cream-colored gown was ruined, wine dripping like crimson ink across the fabric. But she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't defend herself. She just stood there calm, composed, eyes locked forward as though she was looking through them. The crowd whispered, "Who is she? Probably a mistake at check-in. She's not on the guest list." Vivian's smirk grew. Her diamonds shimmered under the light as she raised her glass again. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her tone dripping with fake grace, "let's not ruin the evening with uninvited distractions." Laughter rolled through the room. Not warm, not real. It was the sound of cruelty wearing couture. The guards moved closer, slow, deliberate steps echoing on polished stone. Naomi's gaze flicked toward them once. Just once. And even that was enough to make one hesitate. Her silence felt dangerous, not submissive, strategic. "You don't belong here," Vivian added, her voice tightening with every word. "This is a private event for members of the Langford Foundation." Naomi's response was simple. A faint breath, a tilt of her chin. No words, just composure so controlled, it unsettled the entire room. The wine stain spread slowly across her gown, dark and defiant. But somehow, it looked less like a stain, and more like a declaration. "Security." Vivian snapped again. "Do your job." The guards glanced at each other, unsure. Something about this woman didn't fit the picture of an intruder. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't apologizing. She was waiting. Naomi reached for a napkin, dabbed one streak of wine from her gown, and set it neatly back on the table beside her. It was such a small action, but it shifted the entire atmosphere. The laughter thinned. The whispers quieted, because suddenly, the woman they were mocking didn't look humiliated. She looked in control. And that scared them more than anything. Vivian's voice cracked just slightly. "I said get her out." But no one moved. Naomi finally looked up, her eyes meeting the chandelier above her, the light reflecting across her face like a silent crown. Her lips parted. No anger, no tears, just one quiet, steady breath. They thought they were watching a woman break. But what they were really watching was a storm learning where to strike. The wine wasn't the stain. It was the signal. The ballroom hadn't recovered from the silence yet. But cruelty never waits for quiet. Laughter began again, smaller this time, forced, like a machine restarting. And the moment it started, it spread, one laugh feeding another, until the entire room returned to its favorite pastime. Mocking what it didn't understand. The Langford matriarch, Vivian, clinked her glass against the table. "Come now," she said with that sharp, rehearsed smile. "This is a celebration of legacy, not pity." The crowd joined in, a chorus of agreement dressed as sophistication. Champagne poured. Cameras clicked. Every second, a new angle captured for tomorrow's gossip blogs. Naomi Cole stood still at the center, wine dripping from her gown, her silence louder than their laughter. A young woman at the press table whispered to her colleague, "Should we stop recording?" "No," the other replied, eyes glued to the camera. "This is trending already." Every insult became entertainment. Every humiliation became content. "Security," Vivian said again, more impatient this time. "Escort her out. She's clearly lost." The guards hesitated. One reached for her arm, but Naomi's gaze met his. Not anger, not fear, just stillness, a kind of calm that felt commanding. He froze mid-motion. Even his breathing changed. Vivian frowned. "What are you waiting for?" The guard didn't answer. Neither did Naomi. The tension thickened like smoke. A few guests began recording again, trying to catch the moment before it slipped away. And then a voice from the back. Smug, laughing. "Guess they opened the doors for charity tonight." The crowd erupted again. Harsher this time. Some clapped. Some whistled. And one man shouted across the floor. "Wrong event, sweetheart." Vivian smiled at that one, pleased that the mob was back on her side. "See," she said lightly, "even my guests understand decorum." Naomi finally blinked, slow, deliberate. Then, for the first time that night, she spoke. Protocol 7. 2 words. Soft, unbothered, barely audible. But the way she said them, measured, precise, made the entire room hesitate. Vivian tilted her head. "Excuse me." Naomi looked at her calmly. "You'll understand soon enough." And then silence again. A strange ripple passed through the guests, confusion mixed with discomfort. Because somewhere, in the back of everyone's mind, those 2 words meant something. Phones started buzzing. At first, just one. Then another. Then a dozen more. Guests glanced down at their screens, frowning. One whispered, "Wait, is that her name?" Another voice, urgent, "Check your inbox." Vivian ignored them, waving it off with a laugh. "Oh, please," she said. "This is getting ridiculous." But her smile was tight now. She could feel the attention shifting, not away from Naomi, but toward her. The guard still hadn't moved. The guests were whispering louder. Something unseen had just entered the room. An invisible current of doubt. Naomi's eyes stayed fixed on Vivian. Calm. Steady. The wine had stopped dripping now, and the stain looked darker under the light. Less like ruin, more like armor. "You think silence is power?" Vivian said sharply. "You think standing there makes you important?" Naomi's lips curved slightly. Not a smile, but something more dangerous. "No," she said softly. "What makes me important is what happens next." And for the first time that night, Vivian Langford, billionaire, host, untouchable queen of her own empire, felt the smallest flicker of fear, because the laughter around her was fading, and the phones in every guest's hand were buzzing louder than the orchestra ever did. They thought they were watching a spectacle, but what they didn't know was that the stage they built for her humiliation was about to become the scene of their destruction. The guard still stood frozen. Naomi still stood calm, and the storm had just taken its first breath. The laughter had started to thin, not because the crowd had found kindness, but because their phones were lighting up faster than their mouths could move. Buzz, ping, vibrate, over and over again. Tiny sounds at first, then a chorus. One guest frowned, glancing down at his screen. Then another. Then a dozen more. Brows furrowed. Drinks lowered. The music hadn't resumed. The air felt heavier. Even Vivian Langford noticed it now. "What's going on?" she asked lightly, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. No one answered, because every glowing phone screen in that ballroom was flashing the same headline. Breaking. Cole Industries acquires Langford Group in $10 billion global deal. The crowd froze. Someone whispered, "Wait, Cole Industries. That's her." Naomi didn't move, didn't smile, didn't speak. She simply watched. The guards lowered their hands slowly, eyes darting from Vivian to Naomi, like soldiers realizing they'd been pointing their weapons at their own commander. The tension snapped like a thread. This is absurd." Vivian stammered. "That deal isn't finalized yet." But her voice faltered, because the room wasn't listening to her anymore. They were reading, refreshing, rechecking. The news alert wasn't rumor. It was confirmation. Official. Verified. Cole Industries, Naomi's company, had just swallowed the Langford empire whole. And suddenly, the humiliation didn't look like dominance anymore. It looked like history caught in the act of flipping sides. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "She owns it. She owns them." Naomi finally spoke. Her tone was soft, steady, almost too calm. "Protocol 7, she said again. "That's what we call automatic consolidation." Vivian blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Naomi stepped forward. Not fast, not dramatic, but with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she stood. "It means," she said quietly, "that while you were laughing, your company was signing its own surrender." The words hung in the air. Unbelievable. Impossible. Irrefutable. The big LED screen behind the orchestra flickered. The Langford Foundation logo glitched once, then twice, and vanished. In its place, the bold, white insignia of Cole Industries flared across the entire wall. Cole Industries, official acquisition completed. The guests gasped. Some stood. Others sat frozen, unable to look away. Vivian's champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble. The sound was sharp enough to slice through the silence. "No," she whispered. "This isn't happening." But it was, and everyone knew it. Naomi's calm expression never broke. "You told me I wasn't supposed to be here," she said softly. "But technically, Vivian, this is my event now." The crowd erupted in a wave of whispers and disbelief. Reporters raised their phones higher. Flashlights flickered like lightning. Vivian took one shaky step backward, her face pale, her lips trembling. You can't do this," she stammered. Naomi tilted her head slightly. "I already did." Then she turned, and for a brief, breathtaking moment, the entire ballroom seemed to orbit around her. The same people who had laughed minutes ago now stood frozen, caught between fear and awe. Every empire falls the same way, first with laughter, then with silence, then with realization. The humiliation they staged had become her coronation, and the woman they tried to erase had just written her name in gold across their legacy. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It had arrived. The ballroom was shaking, not from music, not from applause, but from panic. Phones buzzed like locusts. Guests shouted into screens, voices clashing with the chaos of disbelief. "Check the board. It's real. The stock just froze. Our contracts are gone." The Langford name, once untouchable, unshakable, was collapsing in real time. The walls that once echoed with pride were now mirrors reflecting panic. At the center of it all stood Naomi Cole, unmoving, unbothered, untouched. Vivian Langford's perfect posture had vanished. Her voice cracked as she tried to rise above the storm she created. "Everyone calm down," she barked. "This is a technical glitch. It'll be resolved in minutes." But even she didn't believe it. Her son, Alexander Langford, rushed to her side, his phone trembling in his hand. "Mother," he whispered urgently, "it's real. Cole Industries just finalized the takeover. Their board signed it. Ours is done." Vivian's face drained of color. Her hand tightened around his wrist. "No," she said softly, almost to herself. This can't be happening." Naomi finally moved, just one step forward. But that single motion silenced the chaos. Every eye turned, every phone pointed. The woman they mocked minutes ago was now standing on the ashes of their empire. "You threw wine on me," she said, her voice steady, low, and almost gentle, "because you believed power could humiliate." She glanced at the shattered glass on the floor. Vivian's glass. "But power doesn't humiliate," Naomi continued. "It remembers. Her words rippled through the air like thunder wrapped in velvet. The LED wall behind her shifted again. A new message appeared, bold and blinding. Naomi Cole merger activated, effective immediately. Langford Holdings, assets terminated. The guests froze. Every screen in the room began pinging with push alerts. Langford Empire loses $10 billion deal in live takeover. Naomi Cole, CEO behind the merger, confirmed present. Vivian staggered backward, her breath short and shallow. You planned this, she gasped. You came here to humiliate me. Naomi shook her head slowly. No, she said. You handled that part on your own. A low murmur spread through the guests, shame mixing with awe. One of Vivian's longtime allies, a senator, slipped his phone into his pocket and turned away. Another guest, the same man who shouted wrong event earlier, quietly exited through the side door. Their loyalty was vanishing faster than their stock value. Vivian's hands trembled. Her voice cracked again. You can't do this, she said. You'll destroy families, generations of work. Naomi's eyes softened, but her tone didn't. Then maybe they'll remember not to build empires on arrogance. The silence after that was heavy. Not humiliation this time, but reckoning. Vivian looked around at her guests, her friends, her legacy crumbling in real time. No one met her eyes. Not one. Naomi's gaze lifted again to the chandelier above, its light splintering into 1,000 tiny reflections. Her dress still stained, but somehow glowing now. A symbol, not a shame. She turned her head slightly toward the crowd. Every person here watched it happen, she said softly. You laughed when you thought you were watching weakness. But weakness doesn't stand this tall. The words hit like a verdict. Someone clapped. One, hesitant. Then another joined. Then more. Until the entire ballroom was echoing with applause. Not polite applause. Not pity. Respect. Naomi looked once more at Vivian Langford. The woman who threw the wine. The woman who built an empire on exclusion. You told me I didn't belong in this room, she said quietly. But you forgot one thing. I own the building. Vivian sank back into her chair, the applause surrounding her like fire. Naomi turned, her steps measured, steady, final. The doors opened without anyone touching them. She walked through, and with her, so did every ounce of power left in that room. In less than 10 minutes, one woman's dignity had turned a century of dominance into dust. The wine wasn't the stain. It was the warning, and they should have listened. The applause still echoed long after she stopped walking. It rolled through the ballroom like thunder chasing lightning. Loud, raw, unstoppable. But Naomi Cole didn't raise her hands for it. She didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply turned back to face them. The same guests who had laughed at her minutes ago were now standing in stunned silence, faces pale, eyes wide, phones lowered for the first time all night. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim, as though the building itself understood it was witnessing history. Naomi took a breath, slow, centered. Then she spoke. You all taught me something tonight. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but the quiet demanded attention. No one dared interrupt. You taught me that power doesn't just corrupt. It blinds. It makes people forget the difference between grace and arrogance. She stepped forward once, her heels striking marble with precision. You mocked me because you thought I didn't belong here. You threw your wine, your laughter, your words, and you called it culture. Her eyes swept the room, not accusing, just seeing, truly seeing. But legacy without empathy isn't greatness. It's wrought in designer clothing. A hush fell deeper. Even Vivian couldn't move. Her hands clutched the table like a lifeline. Naomi continued. You measure people by invitation lists and last names. I measure people by impact, by the lives they build, not the ones they belittle. The LED wall behind her glowed again. shifting from the Cole Industries logo to a quote in white letters across black. If they won't give you a seat at the table, build your own. The audience watched, transfixed. Naomi's voice softened. I didn't come here tonight for revenge. I came to remind every person watching that dignity isn't given, it's chosen. She paused, letting the silence breathe. And to anyone out there who's ever been told they don't belong, remember this moment, because they can spill their wine. They can whisper their jokes. They can try to stain your name. Her gaze lifted toward the chandelier, its light scattering across her face like a crown. But they cannot touch your worth. A murmur of emotion spread through the guests. Some nodding, some wiping away quiet tears they didn't expect to shed. Naomi's eyes found Vivian one last time. You told me I didn't deserve this room, she said softly. But tonight, this room learned who really built it. She took one final breath, steady, controlled, resolute. Power isn't proven by how loud you speak. It's proven by how calm you remain when the world tests your name. Then she turned to the crowd, her voice lifting slightly. Not commanding, but empowering. So stand tall, even when they laugh, even when they doubt. Because one day, the same room that mocked you will stand to applaud you. And just like that, she was done. The applause rose again. Not forced this time. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Naomi Cole turned, walking toward the exit, wine-stained gown glowing under the chandeliers. Every step echoing like a victory drum. The doors opened. The flashes burst. History followed. They tried to make her a spectacle. She became a symbol. And long after the lights faded, the world would remember the woman who turned humiliation into history and silence into power. By morning, the footage had gone everywhere. News anchors whispered her name like a legend. Talk shows debated her calm like it was strategy. Hashtags flooded timelines. Hashtag the CEO in white. Hashtag power doesn't beg. Hashtag Naomi Cole. Clips from the gala were replayed across continents. The wine, the silence, the line that broke the internet. You told me I didn't belong in this room, but I own the building. Within hours, every major outlet had written a headline. Naomi Cole ends $10 billion deal live at Gala. Humiliation turns to history. The most powerful silence in business. The Langford family issued a statement before noon. Hollow, careful, and 2 sentences too late. Apologies always sound quieter than laughter. Their empire's shares plummeted. Investors withdrew. And the same guests who mocked her spent the next 48 hours deleting photos, removing tags, pretending they hadn't clapped. But Naomi didn't speak again. Not on social media. Not to the press. Not even in victory. Because real power doesn't explain itself. Somewhere far from the city, in a glass office overlooking the ocean, Naomi stood by the window, phone in hand, reading the headlines she never asked for. She smiled once, not out of pride, but out of recognition. The vow she made years ago, on a curb outside a boardroom that had shut its doors in her face, had finally come full circle. If they won't give me a seat at the table, I'll build the building. And she had. Her assistant entered quietly, setting down a folder. Press wants a statement, she said softly. Naomi turned, still gazing out the window. No, she said. Let the story speak for itself. The assistant nodded and left. Naomi's reflection shimmered faintly on the glass. Calm, strong, unbothered. The city lights blinked far below her. Somewhere, another gala was starting. Another crowd was laughing. And another woman was deciding that tonight, silence would no longer be surrender. When people talked about Naomi Cole after that night, they didn't talk about the wine, or the whispers, or even the billions. They talked about the moment, the stillness that held more power than a room full of applause. Because in a world addicted to noise, She reminded everyone what silence can do when it belongs to the right person. The headlines faded. The algorithms moved on. But her story stayed. She didn't need revenge. She had legacy. And legacies don't beg to be remembered. They just are. Power isn't proven by how you fight back. It's proven by how calm you remain when the world tests your name. In every story of power, there's a moment that defines the difference between those who have it and those who think they do. For Naomi Cole, that moment didn't come when she built her company or when the world finally called her billionaire. It came in silence, in a ballroom full of cameras, laughter, and arrogance, where she chose restraint over rage and dignity over destruction. That night wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding the world that grace can be louder than greed. They mocked her for not being on the list. They forgot. She wrote the list. They threw wine to stain her. They didn't realize they were painting her crown. And when they tried to laugh her out of the room, she bought the room. Naomi's name became more than a headline. It became a reminder that power doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just waits and lets the world catch up. Because the greatest revenge isn't humiliation, it's ownership. And ownership doesn't come from entitlement. It comes from endurance. So maybe this story isn't just about Naomi Cole. Maybe it's about you. About every person who's ever been underestimated, laughed at, pushed aside, or told they don't belong. Because one day, the same doors that closed on you will open because of you. And when they do, don't yell, don't gloat, just walk through. Calm, steady, silent, like Naomi did. They threw wine. She built an empire. They mocked her name. She made it immortal. And maybe the moral is simple. Power doesn't beg. It decides. Power isn't about being invited. It's about arriving prepared. If this story moved you, don't scroll past. Hit subscribe, because next week, we're bringing you another true story of silence turned into strength. Because sometimes, the quietest people in the room end up owning the building.